and welcome to Poetry Part 2. Now, often in the poetry sections of the transfer test, grammar and word work style questions are included. For example, you may be asked to put words from the poem in alphabetical order or find an adjective that describes a specific noun from the poem. However, these style questions will be covered later in the transfer test topic video series. This video is building upon our specific knowledge of poetry, its styles and features, and commonly used examples in the transfer test. We won't be looking at all styles of poetry, just the common ones. Previously, we looked at similes and metaphors and how the author uses these techniques to make their poetry more interesting to the reader, but this presents us with the challenge then of having to try and figure out what they're actually saying. So, if you haven't seen that video, I suggest you go back and start there to Poetry Part 1. In this video, we're going to take a look at several poetry styles that are commonly used in the transfer test. And whilst you won't actually need to know or remember the style names for the test, well, not that I've ever seen anyway, this will help you become familiar with their features and better help you answer questions in the test. In this video, we're therefore going to look at limericks, free verse poems and narrative poems. Now, let's take a look at our first style of poetry, which is the limerick. Automatically, you should be able to see something about this piece of poetry, and as I read it, we will also hear something about this piece of poetry, and we can then identify and take a look at its features. So here we go. A creature of charm is the gerbil. Its diet is exclusively herbal. It grazes all day on bundles of hay, passing gas with an elegant gurgle. Now, let's take a look at the features of that piece of poetry in the limerick. So the writing style. What you should notice is that the first, second and fifth lines have a pattern and a rhyme to them. And when we talk about patterns and rhymes, we're talking about the number of syllables in the line, and the rhyming pattern, we normally talk about rhyming couplets. Those are the words that rhyme on one of the lines and another line in the poetry. So if you come across a limerick, you can automatically go and look at the first, second and fifth lines, and you will know that those words rhyme, and that will help you identify any questions that ask you to find rhyming words. That technique is called rhyming couplets. Also, the third and the fourth lines rhyme, but they are slightly shorter than the other lines in the poetry. And this style of poetry tends to be used for humorous poems. So if you were asked about the mood or the feeling or the style that the author has used, you would be looking to tick humorous, not sad or happy or joyous, but humorous in that example. Let's now take a look at our second piece of poetry. Now this is a free verse piece of poetry, and again I'm going to read it through and then we'll discuss the features of this piece of poetry. What weeping face is that looking from the window? Why does it stream those sorrowful tears? Is it for some brutal place vast and dry? Is it to wet the soil of graves? Now, the features of this one, let's take a look. Automatically, when you read that piece of poetry or listened to that piece of poetry, there was no rhyme or no rhythm. So no rhyming couplets were used in that example. It is all natural speech. It's not written in a style that has rhythm or splitting up into certain number of words or syllables per line. It's just natural speech. So typical way that you would talk. In that case, if you look at it, there were questions posed in each of the lines. The overall mood for that poem, definitely one of sadness. A lot of the adjectives that were mentioned there were all sad adjectives. So again, you might be asked questions to pick out words that describe sadness, or you might be asked to describe the mood of the poem, and obviously with that one it is quite sad. So have a good read online at various different types of limericks and free verse poems now. Two very different styles, they're very contrasting. One is opposite to the other. Now we're going to take a look at our third type of poetry, which is narrative poems, and these appear quite often in the transfer test. Now for our third and final type of poetry, we are going to have a look at narrative poems. And as we do this, I want to see if you can identify if there are any of the features that was spotted in the first poem, the limerick, or the second poem, the free verse, are there any common features that the narrative poem shares, or are there any features that it does not share, because that's important as well. And then, can you get a feel for the overall poem? Is it portraying thoughts and feelings, or what is going on with this particular type of poetry? So, let's jump in and have a read, and then we'll take a look at the particular features. This is only a snippet of the poem. It's not the whole poem, and you'll see why whenever we jump into the features. So here we go. The Lady of Shalott. On either side the river lie long fields of barley and of rye, that clothe the wold and meet the sky, and through the field the roads run by to many towered Camelot. And up and down the people go, gazing where the lilies blow, round an island there below, the island of Shalott. Now, what did we notice about that particular type of poem? Let's take a look at some of the features. Okay, so let's take a look at the writing features for this particular type of poetry. Like the narrative writing that you would come across in your classroom, that you have definitely done, the narrative poetry tells a story, so it's a story type poetry. It can use rhyme and rhythm in the story. As you can tell in that poem, the rhyming couplets, the words that rhyme, were at the end of the lines, apart from the very last line that seemed to punctuate the end of the poem. Or in that case, that particular verse. We only got a snippet of that poem, and we'll come to that in just a wee second. Now, most poetry tends to focus on thoughts and feelings. This one is all about the story. There's often no narrative in some poetry because it is just about the thoughts and feelings, but this one is the opposite. It's just storytelling without thoughts and feelings. The poetry tends to be quite long. So like I said, this is just one verse, and in the transfer test you could get up to 4-5 verses. So definitely read the poem several times to get familiar with it and to get a feel of it, so that you can understand whether the poem is happy or sad, because you're going to get that question posed to you. What was the overall feeling of the poem? And they can also use different adjectives or old-fashioned language. Now, here is my top tip for this that we'll actually do again when it comes to comprehension skills. So when you come across a word that you don't know, the first thing you do is you read the sentence that it is in. Read the word before it, read the word after it. Does that give you any clues as to what that word means? If not, what you do is you start getting a little bit wider with your search. So take the word that you don't know, you've read the word before, you've read the word after, and now you read the whole line that it's in. Does that give you any context or any greater understanding of what that word means? If you're still stuck, you read the whole paragraph that it's in. Now, we don't just jump in and read the whole paragraph and try and work out what the word is on our second read, because remember, we're trying to make the best use of our time during the test. So what we do is we start with step 1, just read the word before and after, and does that help you? Step 2, read the line that it's in, and then step 3, read the paragraph. What if you still can't get it after that? Have a good guess. Never leave anything blank in the transfer test. Just have a good guess and see if you can work out what it means. But hopefully by following those steps, that helps you get a little bit of context as to what that difficult word means, especially if it's old-fashioned language, which it commonly can be in the transfer test. So there we have it, 3 types of poetry that are commonly featured in the transfer test. We've looked at their features as well, the types of questions you might get, and we'll come back and look at the other types of things that you might get in that section of the test, like we've mentioned, the alphabetical order and that sort of thing. Make sure, and I repeat this from my last video, reading is so important, not just to build your vocabulary, but to become familiar with these types of texts, in this case poetry. It just puts you in a better position to attempt questions when you have a deeper understanding of the text and a greater vocabulary. You'll not get stuck on tricky words. Maybe you'll have seen the poetry before. It just makes the whole process that much easier. So read, and read some more. Okay. That's it for this video. Stay tuned, it's about time I popped in a dad joke, so here it comes.